Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. So we joined once again talking about how to find the spouse. So welcome back to the marriage course that is presented by North Hudson Islamic Educational Center as a service to the community, in specific to those that want to orient themselves on the issue of marriage. One of the things that we talked about last time was the importance of community and the importance of falling back on community when it comes to developing our relationships and when it comes to finding a spouse, to use your community network. Now, we have many cases in which that doesn't work for people. And so the book is presenting the idea of guidelines for the internet. And I wanted to go over those 7 points that are mentioned in the book. First, there's a story that's put forward about Sister Hawa. And the idea here is to present an experience of those who may be looking online of what they encounter. Firstly, in recent times, there's been a number of internet websites that have emerged many patterns after non-Muslim websites with an Islamic coloring to it or some sort of Islamic flavor. But in reality, many people, after utilizing these websites, they complain about what it is that they encounter and the type of experience that they have. And the number of people that complain and the number of people that highlight the negatives are not a small number. At the same time, we know many people that have used these sites and they have moved forward to find some sort of stable relationship. It's not easy either way. But one of the things that I'll say before going into what is mentioned in the book is that it's important not to go through these processes alone, not to find yourself in a situation wherein you're left without support and then emotionally you're dragged into a series of scenarios and situations in a relationship in which you really don't have any understanding what you got into, because the reality is that you went into a relationship with someone that is disconnected from your ability to really look into their background or to have any understanding of where that person is coming from. It's a little different when the person is in the same region that you're in and it's facile or easy to encounter that person, to to get to know about that person, to see what kind of community that they're tied in. And that is what I call the short distance relationship. But when you start talking about long distance relationships, in which it's not so easy for you to really see what's going on with that person and what community they're tied into and so on and so forth, then what happens is you're dealing with a dangling person who's telling you whatever about their identity, and there's no real way to understand what's going on with that person. And then you find yourself emotionally wrapped up into a relationship with a stranger that the only thing that you have to rely on with regard to the information that says something about that person is what you're told at the moment. And that doesn't mean that you can't encounter a good Muslim person in that way. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that those circumstances open up to a series of risks. And if a person is going through that process by themselves, if a person is doing that alone, then that person makes themselves vulnerable and increases the possibility of falling into problems because they're dealing with an actual stranger in which there's already risks, and then they're doing it alone. And the issue of heartbreak and the issue of confusion, the issue of frustration, all of that comes into that. It already comes into the whole process of trying to find someone to get married. We didn't talk about that much, but this exacerbates or makes the situation worse, right? And so, Muslim websites for marriage, it could work for some. It comes with its problems. I'm not going to push in one way or another because the situation that we're confronting as a community is so dire, it's so difficult for people to find one another, that to come in and to push people away from a possible means by which they can find a spouse would be irresponsible on my part. But at the same time, not highlighting that these websites and this means has its own problems, and that one shouldn't do it alone, right? Without highlighting those points, it would be also irresponsible of me. The story is mentioned of Hawa, who was ready to give up on the possibility of ever getting married, and that seems to be the trend among many Muslims, unfortunately. She had received many proposals over the years and had seriously considered several. At one point, she was almost engaged and discovered that her prospective fiance had an addiction to painkillers. Her friends urged her to set up an online profile, which she did with great reluctance, just like many Muslims do. She was even more frustrated when she started getting a lot of interest from men who wanted to marry her simply because she was a U.S. citizen. Just as she thought that perhaps she was not meant to get married, she met a wonderful man who was working in the Emirates. After checking references, she agreed to meet him. Yunus came to New York and met Hawa's entire family, answering all of their questions and openly discussing their areas of concern. Today, Hawa and Yunus have two beautiful children and are very grateful for the matrimonial site that enabled them to meet. That is a scenario in which Hawa was not going at it alone, and Yunus was willing to engage her and her family. And alhamdulillah that worked out. The author says most people who do ultimately have a good marriage as a result of meeting someone online also say that they had to do a lot of filtering and that they were sometimes approached inappropriately. That is, for brothers and sisters, it has become a major issue. Major issue. That's why we say going at it alone is not recommended. We have a few guidelines that may help reduce the risk of getting hurt, or not only getting hurt, of falling into harm, spiritual harm, or even putting yourself in danger, not just thinking of emotional heartbreak. One of the things that he says, or that they say as guidelines for the internet, is one, don't rely on what is presented online without a second reference. Find out as much as you can from other sources. That's why we say connection to a community, connection to humans is important, because when you're connected to humans, it's easy to be able to see what's going on, right? And so when a person is talking to another person on a regular basis and that person is tied into a community, it's more than likely that it's going to be easy to figure out things about that person. That's just the world that we live in. Between online searching and on the ground investigation, it's easy to kind of figure out where someone's come from. Of course, there's always details that are left uncovered, but it's easy. So here it says, do plan to meet in person as soon as possible. The longer you communicate online without meeting, the more likely you are to develop expectations or ideas about the other person that may or may not be real. That's true. And that meeting should be in public places and should be known to people that that's going to happen, just to secure yourself, right? It would be nice if it can happen in the context of families. That's the most ideal, right? But if it's going to happen at a more private level, then it should be in a public place as much as possible. And people, when they meet, they should go into that with the understanding that they're meeting this person with the intention to figure out if marriage is going to take place or not. Not just meeting this person for the sake of just having, a good time, and that's it. And so by the time you go to meet, you should kind of have some understanding, of where there should have been some filter work that is done, right? There should be some filter work that is done, and it should be worth the meet. That's why we say people tied into communities and being in the same region and so on and so forth. That's very important. Here he says, do not have long conversations without doing your homework because emotions will overshadow your thinking. If you become emotionally involved, you will tend to compromise more of your values. That's true. That's true. Do a criminal background check for priors, history of domestic violence, child abuse. That's all comes up in the background check. It's more important to be safe as you proceed than to worry about offending the person you're getting to know. Involve another person in all your online communications. Whether it's a relative or an imam, have a third party, and so on and so forth. That way you can filter if a person is scamming you. Never marry someone via the internet. Some people may say we must get married Islamically because we are in love and crossing the boundaries, afraid that the first meeting will be so passionate that they will fall into haram behavior. This is very dangerous. It makes more sense to move cautiously, meet the person with the third party present or in a public place, I say. Get to know the person face to face, then decide whether or not to get married. Utilize a website where there is filtering, monitoring, and no one can post anything without references. That's if you're using, that reality, the reality of some sort of Muslim website. But people, let's be honest, people are meeting each other through Facebook. They're meeting each other through Instagram. That's why we say people have to be clear on the intention as to why it is that they are engaging other people. And you should always be ready if you're opening the door that you have made salat istikhara. Once you get to a certain type of point after conversing and you meet the person, you should be open to the reality of that relationship taking place if you filtered properly. And that relationship has to be one in which you're ready to commit, if need be, to commit. But you shouldn't go into a situation which you're not sure if you want to move forward. You understand what I'm saying? And what I mean by that is this, so people don't confuse what I'm saying. And they say the Imam is pushing just people to get married. No, I'm saying that the conversations that you should have had before, prior to meeting the person, should be conversations which allow you to get an insight into that person, so that when you meet that person, you have an understanding of whether you want to move forward in a serious relationship or not. You understand? And you should have gone into talking with that person with a clear intention with yourself that you're investigating to see if this is a prospective spouse. It doesn't, and I'm not saying that you have to rush into it. You don't have to rush into it, the issue of marriage. But you should be in that process of filtering out whether you want to be in a committed relationship with this person or not. Brothers, especially, have to be very serious when they go into these types of situations. Sisters, take time to filter the process. That doesn't mean that brothers shouldn't filter the process, but brothers have to be the backbone. They have to come to the table with a degree of seriousness and the readiness to handle the responsibility of what it means to engage a Muslim woman. Right. And so the issue that we have here is the one of filtering, the one of seriousness, the one of clarity, preparedness. People have to be prepared, or else what happens, and we'll talk about preparedness in the next session, but what happens with when people are not prepared is that they emotionally compromise, or they fall into situations that they're not ready to handle. They fall into emotional situations that they're not ready to be committed to that. So what was the purpose of opening the door to the conversation with a person of the opposite sex that that conversation that opened up was one about romance? It wasn't like, well, can you direct me to the halal meat store? Or can you tell me if you know a Muslim real estate agent, or where's the mosque? You know, it's not those types of conversations. People are entering conversations wanting to know the other person. So when you go into these types of situations, you have to be committed to the intention of doing the work that's necessary, or else don't open up the door. I'm saying that especially to brothers, right? And so brothers have to be serious, about what it is that they're doing, and then let the sisters figure out where it is that they're at. Pushing the idea of marriage immediately is not a healthy concept, but pushing the idea of commitment, I'm 100% for that. And the idea of committing to get to know one another, being open to be married, people have to be serious about what it means to go into a relationship. Brothers especially have to be extremely serious. You can't have two people undecided about what's going on in the relationship. Somebody has to be the bedrock, the foundation. Somebody has to be the one that's firm in the situation. And many times, brothers are accused of being the ones that are not serious. We find situations in which the sisters are not clear on what they're doing. And we'll talk about that next time. But in this session, we just want to say that by the time you meet in person, you should have understood what kind of orientation this person is coming from. You know what I'm saying? So that when you meet in person, it's more to verify moving forward with a more serious commitment or not. And brothers have to be serious from the beginning, that when you are talking to a sister, especially when you opened up the idea of romance, that you're doing it with commitment in mind. Even if she's not committed, you have to be committed. And I say that at the end of the day, because if we have two parties uncommitted, it's just going to be a mess. So one person has to be serious, and the men have to be serious, and the men have to be ready to handle that responsibility. That doesn't mean that the sisters shouldn't be serious as well. And as I mentioned, we see more and more situations in which sisters are not serious. But until next time, people, we we will regroup, and we will continue the topic. The filtering process is very important. And the most essential thing that I can reiterate, repeat, say again, is don't do this alone. Don't do this alone. There's no easy way, there's no prescriptive way. It's just we're living in a time period where it's very difficult for people to find a prospective spouse. That's why we don't want to shut down what are a possible means, but do not go at it alone. And be prepared if you're going to step out into the world and you're going to look for someone to be a companion. Be prepared to be in a relationship. Don't play games with the reality of marriage. Don't play games with the reality of being in a relationship with someone else. Be firm in what you want to do. Be clear. And that will be a filter in and of itself. Everything else is filtering qualities and compatibility. But from the beginning, you should be clear as to what it is that you want, yeah, and why it is that you're engaging. And I especially say that for my brothers in Islam. And with that, we come to an end. Assalamu alaikum.